go. It's the 50th episode of the Smoke-Filled Room. Had you told me when we started this we would do 50 of these, I would have said, nah, I'm out. We're good. I'm not doing 50 of these things. And yet here we are in our 50th episode, and yet we're still going strong. It's exciting. We've got three awesome guests to join us this week, starting with current elected official, State Senator Craig Wilcox. He's in the 32nd District, which he's represented since 2018. Prior to that was a McHenry County board member, also as a veteran. So thank you, sir, for your service. Craig, we're glad to have you.
Always glad to be here with you. And it's been one show that no matter what I'm doing, it's in a background Friday night, Saturday night. Enjoy the way this show plays out and the banter that goes back and forth. So glad to be here.
Well, that's a compliment to us, and also a little bit depressing about that's how you spend your Friday night. So I'm sorry that's your Friday night. We'll do drinks, one Friday night coming soon. All right, former legislator, we've got Mark Batinick. He was the Republican floor leader in the Illinois House, also a policy expert, and I know you do a good amount of polling now. Mark, glad to have you.
Awesome to be on. I'm very excited to be on the 50th episode. Holy cow! Woo-hoo.
Well, we'll have to get commemorative shirts made up, Lane. We also have Robert Windon. He's an experienced trial attorney. He's the principal of Windon Strategies, also an expert in a number of things, but election law especially is one of the things that we like to work with Robert on. So Robert, glad to have you, and also glad to have your beard.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Mark stole my line. I didn't know I was going to be honored with being a guest on the 50th installment. So all the better to make this my first appearance.
Well, your lovely wife asked us to bring you on, so that way you'd have to see your beard in a recording, and maybe it would get you to trim it. So we'll see if her strategy works.
We'll see.
We also have Core's political experts. We have Michael and Chris. Guys, glad to have you.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Great to be back in my baby blue sweatshirt.
Yeah, we'll all have to talk about our fashion choices. I don't know what Butler's wearing over there. Is that like half camo, half whales on a t-shirt, on a shirt?
Nah, it's camo. It's camo.
I don't see nothing, Colin. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Michael's going subterfuge this week.
That's right.
Well, speaking of a first topic that isn't subterfuge, apparently nobody told me this is Chicago Bears week. Certainly we knew with them having the first pick in the draft as well as the 9th that there'd be a lot of Bears news this week. We are recording this on Thursday, so we don't know what the picks will be. Our predictive powers are used only for politics, so we can't tell you what's going to happen in tonight's draft. By the time you watch this, you'll already know. So we'll just look stupid, and you'll already know what's going on. But in addition to the Bears draft, we've also had this giant, splashy press event this week about what the Bears are going to do with their stadium. So they're looking at now doing it in the lakefront. They're looking at $2 billion in private money, another 1.5, maybe even more than 2 in state money that they're looking for. And they want to get this done in this legislative session, which, as of the time of this recording, is less than a month away to the end of this session. All sounds super ambitious. Let me pass it to our current legislator, because we'd be remiss if we didn't do that. Senator Wilcox, from what we've heard, not seeing a huge round of excitement coming out of Springfield on this, but what are you hearing on the ground?
So, I mean, we certainly can listen to the governor saying he's skeptical. The Senate president not exactly jumping up and down. And Speaker Welch really just said, looking forward to the continued discussions. I know a part of it has the Sports Financing Authority probably having to make some level of presentation. But as far as details, we have not seen anything yet.
But the thing is, I mean, we'll get to this, but I think the fact that they rolled this out in a, attractive sort of press rollout, and the governor hadn't been briefed. Nobody in the legislature has been talked to. And that's where this decision is ultimately going to be made. Seems like a tactical misstep, but we'll keep it to broad thoughts, I guess, at the beginning, but that's something I want to hammer on. But curious anybody else's thoughts about all this. Mark, you're muted.
I should probably unmute myself. I could fill the whole hour with something on the stadium, but I'll let other people jump in and kind of give the macro before we get into the micro. When I ran in 2014, and even back when the stadium was rebuilt the first time, I remember railing my state senator for how that got passed. I used it as an example, and I actually found my old notes from my 2014 election of how to waste public dollars. This actually can be the exact opposite. Now, I voted for both ComEd bailouts, or I voted against both ComEd bailouts. And those happened real fast, and those were billions of dollars. But if we're going to be if we look at Chicago as being a world-class city, this is actually the type of thing we should be able to do. There's a whole bunch of deep. I think the Bears have bungled their rollout. However, there's all the major ingredients to get a deal like this done, except for one. That me sitting on the outside looking back, whether it be the Capitol bill, whether it be either comment bailout, whether it be some of the pension stuff that was done, there's a path to get everybody to get everybody on board and get this done. It's just a matter of whether they can. And like I said, they're missing one major ingredient, but we're really missing a lot on the numbers for some of this stuff. I mean, one of the things that I talked about in 2014 is we build an open air stadium tying up the lakefront for basically 8-10 dates a year. And you look at Indianapolis, got a Super Bowl. The net impact of the Super Bowls for Indianapolis was over $300 million. That's the difference in revenue the city and businesses receive versus an average weekend versus when the Super Bowl wasn't
Mark,
there.
let's be honest. If friggin' Indiana can get a Super Bowl, like if we've got a decent stadium, I've got to imagine we can get a Super Bowl.
Super Bowl, they've had 2 Final Fours. They get the Big Ten championship. The Bands of America, they constantly have things rolling. It was a $700 million boondoggle when they built it the first time because it was open air. But if they do this right, there's a way to get this done where it actually protects the taxpayers. And look, I usually vote against this stuff, but there's a way to get it done.
Interesting thoughts. Robert, what about you?
Well, so Collin, my big thought is the question: is this about bungling a rollout, or is this all a negotiation tactic on behalf of the Bears? Do they really care if Springfield and the city is on board or not? Are they trying to scare Arlington Heights into realizing they have other options, and either you negotiate the tax bill, or we're going to go someplace else? And if it doesn't get Arlington Heights to the table, then maybe they have to start their proper lobbying. And I don't know. And shockingly, nobody's called me to tell me what they're thinking, but that's been my assumption this whole time.
Interesting. I mean, everybody's taken this, Robert, has been that it's all Chicago all the time. I've not heard a single person give the take you just gave. I don't know if I agree with it, but honestly, I think it's worth thinking about. It's interesting.
I think what he's talking about there is actually a pretty strong possibility. I mean, that thought had crossed my mind. But once again, if you take a step back and you want to be that world-class city and you want to hold these fantastic events, it's nice being in Arlington Heights. It's not a bad area. It's a lot. The imagery and what it does to the city and the state is much more compelling on the lakefront than it is just in a field in the middle of Arlington Heights.
Anecdotally,
you got to go take a. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Anecdotally, I'm not a Bears fan. I've been very open about the fact that I'm a fan of the Green Bay Packers, and everybody watching, yeah, boo, boo, yeah. But in any case, I know a lot of Bears fans because I live in this damn town, and the reaction I'm hearing from the public right now is basically they don't want it. They don't want their tax dollars to go to a stadium, which seems to be the common mantra across the United States right now. Is they don't want tax dollars going to a stadium, even if it's a stadium that they in fact want and like because they're a fan of the team. In addition, the rollout itself was just stupid. You have Brandon Johnson there, which is never a good look for anybody right now. If you have Brandon Johnson as your biggest cheerleader on any given issue right now, they had a pastor give an opening prayer at the press conference, which in of itself isn't bad. It's just weird, not something that you would expect when rolling out a multi-billion-dollar sports stadium package is an opening prayer from a pastor. That seems shoehorned in. Wasn't a very good rollout. And the public doesn't really have the taste for a $2 billion project. Though I would agree with Mark that this is something you need if you want to move Chicago forward. And if this was Rahm Emanuel, if this was Daley the Dumber or something like that, I would easily see this going forward. And you'd have a lot more stronger lobbying background behind it. I don't think that Brandon Johnson is the type of mayor that's like Daley or Emanuel was, so it's going to be difficult.
Craig, you were jumping in before.
Yeah, I mean, if you just go based on the minute 47 Twitter X space layout, it's a great concept design. Looking back through the end of the end zone at the skyline, the question is, how realistic is that development? And it ultimately comes down to what the 1.5 billion in the infrastructure. How much of that really is needed for the stadium, for the concourse, And is that the public value? So, you got to ask yourself, what does a Southern Illinois non-Bears fan, what's it cost them? And what's a return on investment? And it's not really an investment. What's the return on cost? How many years of X number of events every year? And do the taxpayers have a vested interest in those future revenues? And those are the types of questions that need to be answered.
They're also
one thing I'd ask is, I don't understand why this project is looked at so differently than Goshen, a Chinese battery maker, or obviously we all are grateful that Belvedere and the surrounding area is going to have those investments in the plants in that area now. But these are all large scale economic investments. And, it seems like if you're a sports franchise, you get zero. If you're a Chinese battery maker, you can have whatever you want. Isn't there like a happy medium between both of those things? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
This is what I really want to get into. I mean, you talk about those deals. I brought up the ComEd deals where we literally just subsidized and handed ComEd billions of dollars in a way that there wasn't any sort of give back, and that deal got done. So from a standpoint, this should be easier. There's tax dollars and then there's tax dollars. And let me give you the difference. There's a difference between the state cutting a check, and there's a difference between like what they did at the intermodal, where they said, okay, the income from the people who work at the intermodal then go back to the intermodal in terms of the subsidy. So you're not pulling from some sort of existing bucket. You're creating a bucket. You have the amusement tax. You have tip dollars in the city of Chicago. And the idea that improving an interchange near Soldier Field is subsidizing a stadium is hogwash. I mean, we do this around factories. We do this around busy businesses. We do it around downtowns. So there's a lot of buckets they can pull from. What could make this a win for the governor, and what could make this a win for so many people, is if there's not that very direct tax subsidy like the ones that ComEd and other places get. So if it's done through, they don't even have video gaming in the city of Chicago, for example. So there's all kinds of places where they can potentially pull money. But when you stand back and you look at the big ingredients, and like I said, one's missing. I'm waiting for somebody to ask me what the one that is missing is. The mayor needs a win desperately. And if the governor can pull this off without direct tax dollars, he's got a big $2 billion, $4 billion win as he's marching off to try to run for president, right? The unions want it. They have stuff in there for the Black Caucus with minority contracts. You have about half the votes you need just for people that are in the city of Chicago. You start talking, if the NFL comes out and simply makes a statement with a wink and an eye, hey, we're really going to be looking at a Super Bowl in Chicago if this happens. Suddenly that makes it a lot easier. When you start talking about all the other events that I was talking about, there's a way to not have direct dollar subsidize this and get this done. So there's a lot of boxes that tick. The Bears, the major ingredients are there for all but one of them.
Who's going to be the one who's going to just give Mark what he wants and ask him for the one?
What's the one, Mark?
All right, well, Craig actually hit. If you look at the Bears press conference, we can talk about the mayor having a win. We can talk about the governor having a win. We can talk about unions having a win. We can talk about all these people having major wins. They haven't come out and they haven't, if you look at their lobbyist team and you look at their approach, they haven't given the downstate Republican or even the suburban Republican reason to vote for it. And anytime a big deal like this gets done, the governor wants bipartisan support. Every single time. This isn't a social issue. This is one of those big projects where the governor likes to have a couple of at least, handful of Republicans that have votes on. If you look at the 2019 Capitol bill, he wasn't going to do it. We were in the room. I was in the room with leadership, and we said, we're not voting for this tax increase. We're a hard no. The entire House Republican caucus was a no. We reached out. We gave them a list of demands that included getting rid of one of the small business taxes. We gave them a list of 10 things. They said, okay, we put some votes as a caucus on it. That's what needs to happen. And there's ways to get it done, but that's the major ingredient that the Bears are missing right now.
Interesting. I mean, so the comment I wanted to make, which I'll slide this in here now, is sort of the rollout to me, has the impression, we've all dealt with politics for a while. Picture that first-time candidate who's super naive, who just thinks they know how everything in the world works, and they show up and suddenly the realities of politics and the realities of Springfield just barrel them over. And that's the impression I'm getting from this Bears team and this rollout when it comes to this public process. They got this press conference to roll this out, and it was amateur hour. It was as if these people who don't understand politics in the state of Illinois ran the whole thing. As Chris said, you have Brandon Johnson there, who's at the apex of his unpopularity, who, by the way, is not the guy we need to hear from if this is ever going to pass. You had Stacey Davis Gates there, which, to your point, Mark, if you're going to try to get Republican votes, why do you have the head of the CTU, who's hated right now by Republicans and many Democrats, at your press conference? You haven't rolled it out to Springfield legislators. You didn't have unions there. You should have been surrounded by all the trades union heads at that press conference. I mean, if you want this thing to actually happen, there's an obvious path if you understand Springfield. But whoever's making these decisions, just either they're being vetoed by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, or they don't know what they're doing, because this rollout was was rank naivety to me. I can't speak right now. I've got a one-month-old child that I don't sleep, so don't hold that against me. But it made me think of every new candidate I've ever dealt with who's like, oh, this is how the world should work, before they actually, get a little dry behind the ears. And that's what this looked like. It was the exact opposite of what you do. You don't go straight to the press if you want Springfield to support your deal. And that's what they did.
So they needed to announce Taylor Swift's first concert once the stadium was built.
Bring out Travis Kelce and T Swifty and just have those two run the press conference.
That would be 180 popular support for this plan.
Look, I was actually going to bring up when we talk about revenue and tax dollars. I went to Vegas and saw Pink in October. I can't see Pink at Soldier Field. Taylor Swift, all those acts coming through. The senator hit upon it in kind of a funny way, but it's true. Like, there's a way to appeal to everybody on this. There's a way to appeal to everybody. And they've bungled a lot of it, but they have to start reaching out to Republicans. And to my knowledge, they bent over backwards to get Democrats on board and Democrat-sided interests on board. They have done absolutely nothing to get Republicans on board. And this does not happen. This sort of project does not happen without significant Republican support.
Well, and Mark, I think they sort of misread the tea leaves. The last time they tried to push something through in Springfield, they went to the chamber and they went to some of the Republican caucus members to sort of take the lead, and they got bashed over the head for that strategy. So then they went all the way to the far end of the other extreme, and they get the most progressive people out of the city of Chicago to take the lead. It's like, guys, do you realize there's a middle ground here? Actually, a fairly large middle ground that you can live in. You don't have to be this extreme and then this extreme. I don't understand why they can't just come in and say, hey, this is a consensus plan. We're all coming together for this. It's for the good of the state and the city. And look, we've got diversity up here. It seemed obvious. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know.
Maybe the higher core.
Well, my intimation was not that we would have done better. It's simply that I think anyone could have done better. I don't know what the hell they're doing. But personally, listen, I'd much rather them be in Arlington Heights. I hope Robert's right, because then I live 5 minutes away and we can get a skybox at the stadium and bring all our clients out. So everyone would win if they come out to Arlington Heights.
Well, and I fully admit that there's some bias in my thinking there too. I want them out this way, even though I'm not a Bears fan. I think it's huge for the Northwest suburbs. And this goes to Mark. I agree with you that it's like there's a path here, because the things that are coming to Chicago are increased sales taxes, are increased taxes that you can get and you can quantify. Whereas the argument out here with Arlington Heights is it's not the city, it's the school districts who don't benefit from those things. Is they're going to argue over what this valuation is because they want the property taxes. And yeah, they're going to get some when the property taxes go up in the area if they do, or the property values, excuse me. But they don't get to say, we're imposing an entertainment tax. They just don't get to add these things if the Bears are out here, and that makes that negotiation tougher out this way.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to keep an eye on it. Certainly is interesting, and definitely has been Bears week. So let's shift. Let's move on from the Bears and talk about something a little less frustrating, but still frustrating because it's Illinois. Let's talk BIPA. So again, I think this is a hot issue happening now. So we'll start with you, Senator. Just curious as to your thoughts. This is, you guys just deliberated on this bill in the Senate, the BIPA reform. So we've talked about it a lot on these episodes. I don't think I need to rehash what this is or why this is needed. I'll simply say that it seems at the moment it's a bit controversial. Most of the business groups have aligned against Cunningham's reform bill. There's a few, including the Technology Manufacturing Association, TMA, out of Schaumburg, who's aligning with it, and they support it. Craig, what have you seen on this? And I guess I'd ask you, why is it so controversial?
So from a controversial perspective, the major change that appeared to come out in Cunningham's bill was kind of what the Supreme Court had looked at was, are we talking single instance violations, or are we talking an every use type violation? I mean, everyone goes back to the White Castle report, and there the language was ambiguous enough that you could go where if you were using the thumbprint to do your clock in, clock out, it was every time you touched your thumb, not the instance that you used biometrics for clock in, clock out. So that was the part of the change. I actually supported the bill on the floor because it gave to smaller businesses that clarification that ultimately was needed right away. Now, the larger corporations definitely had a number of other interests that we would have liked to have seen as well. But I had a chamber meeting just earlier this week with about 30 chamber members, networking group, and we kind of talked. Who's using biometrics in their business at this point? And it's not as prevalent for probably under 50 employee type structures, but the potential is there. And to know that your one use, if you didn't do it properly, is not going to cost you 50 times, 7 times a day type of a structure.
Yeah, I mean, I know what they're holding out for is a few of those changes you talked about, like protecting some of the data centers and a few other things. They also want retroactivity literally in the bill, whereas it was read on the floor, which I'm not a legal expert, but I've been told that's enough. But, there's some things, it's not a perfect bill, certainly, but as you said, it's a step in the right direction. People got to realize in Springfield, if you can get a step in the right direction, that's a heck of a lot better than what you're typically going to get out of this state. So I certainly applaud you for voting for it. We'll see what happens in the House in terms of any changes that might be made to it. If you and I were writing this bill, heck yeah, we'd write it a lot stronger. We'd add some more things to it. But, there's a reason why some respected groups like TMA have said, hey, listen, we'll take the win.
So I don't know if Robert wants to drop in on, legislative intent on the floor versus the language of the law. And Mark, if you remember when we did our first week introduction, if you talk to the Supreme Court justices, they kind of alluded to that a little bit, that there is the letter of the law. And if that is ever a bit ambiguous, they can go look at the legislative intent. But at this point, just because you've said something on the floor is not a substitute for having effective language in a bill that becomes law.
Yeah. I won't go too far down the rabbit hole on it. It is something that absolutely the appellate court, the courts will look at. But it's kind of like the thing that I tell any of my clients, that it's a thing out there, that if, it's not in a bill, but you can never count on it. You don't know what they're going to go to, and it's only if it's ambiguous. They may do kind of what they did here, albeit differently, where they kind of said, hey, we think you need to go clean this up. But, they can look to that, and that's where I do encourage legislators like yourself anytime that, hey, maybe we're not going to get into all the details in the bill just because it's already a long enough bill, to make sure those intents are put on the floor, put in committee notes, whatever else, so that the courts have something to go back to figure out what you guys were trying to do when these, behemoth laws are put into place, even when they're not, as massive. They're difficult to go through.
Well, a question that I have is, I'm putting on my tinfoil hat for a second, but it seems to me the Senate caucus, Cunningham, and of course Harmon, who is behind the scenes on this, are trying to thread the needle here. They don't want to tick off the trial lawyers. but they understand this needs to be done. And so by not putting it in the bill, by reading it on the floor, they're allowing their trial lawyers, their big donors, to still file the lawsuits, but ultimately the trial lawyers know the lawsuits won't go their way because they've read the intent into the bill. I don't know, just to me, just putting on that tinfoil hat, they don't want to tick off their biggest donors, which are basically the trial lawyers for many of these senators. And so by putting it straight into the bill, now you're saying, hey, you can't even file the lawsuit. But by just saying we've read it into the floor, now at least they can file their lawsuits, make their money, and eventually the businesses might come out okay. I mean, that's just how this reads to me.
This whole thing is absurd. Has anybody met somebody who's been harmed by having to use their thumbprint to clock in and clock out? What you just hit, Collin, talks about, one of the groups that's clearly running the state and how bad this bill is. My understanding is that there's certain safety, safety technology things in trucks that immediately turn off when they hit the Illinois border. So our roads are less safe because we have BIPA, right? So this is a case of just politicians getting in the way of the state doing well and doing best for its citizens. The whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know anybody that's been harmed. The trial lawyers have way too much power. The fact that we're even talking about something that was not the intent wasn't for a bunch of businesses to get sued because they used a thumbprint for a time clock. It's just a horrific thing that should be easily solved, and it should be. I know it's kind of an inside baseball thing that's trumpeted a little bit. It's hard to explain on the campaign trail, but just in general, these are the type of things that when you're at a chamber meeting, when you're talking to small groups, you can say, what's wrong with Springfield? What's wrong with the other side of the aisle? Let me give you an example. They're willing to put your life on the road at risk because they want to keep the trial lawyers happy. That's what they're willing to do. Now, if somebody has that moral compass, is that the type of leadership you want out of Springfield? People who are going to put your life at risk because the right people are going to make dollars out of it. Just the fact that you so casually kind of described this scenarios to why we're going to do legislative intent on the floor versus in the language is pretty pathetic. That's even just a casual thought. This should have been cleaned up long ago. It should be easy. It was a mistake. This is dumb. Other states don't do it. It's the type of thing that holds us back and we can't get out of our own way.
Yeah, you're certainly not wrong in that regards. And we also have thoughts on this. I mean, it's a lot like what they're trying to. I know we don't have this topic in our agenda, but we're watching this battle happen in California right now about charging Facebook and Google for any articles that are posted on their platforms, and now Facebook and Google are just shutting them down and not letting you search for news and post their news in that state. I mean, it's when these politicians get in the way, this is the kind of crap that happens.
The only real quick thing I will add, Collin, I won't totally ruin your tinfoil hat because I don't think you're necessarily wrong. But the majority of those lawsuits are contingency-based lawsuits. So if the trial lawyers aren't convinced that there's a good chance they're going to win, they're not filing those lawsuits.
Fair. Okay. Fair. It is interesting, Craig, you mentioned sort of big interest versus small interest. I think one of the reasons why you see groups like TMA support this, but maybe groups like IMA, because people don't realize there are actually two manufacturing groups in the state. The reason being is just who they represent. TMA is specifically focused on small and mid-sized manufacturers, whereas IMA, the vast majority of their money comes from the big manufacturers. And so it's just they're advocating for their members. No one's doing anything wrong, but you see that split happening in Springfield on this bill, which is, hey, listen, for small mom and pop sized manufacturers, they need this, let's get this done. Whereas a group like IMA can hold out and say, listen, our big manufacturers, they'll fight this until they'll die on this hill if that's what it takes. And so for anybody who's watching this, if you're curious why maybe there's a split with the business groups, that's one of the major reasons why you see that difference. All right, let's move to another topic, and then we'll get into some political stuff here. But as we predicted just the last couple weeks on these episodes and on these shows, and look, it's happening. It was revealed this week that CPS, of course, bowing to the Chicago Teachers Union, has actually been trying to privately cut the budgets of selective enrollment schools, magnet schools, and as we talked about last week, and I think even the week before, Springfield Democrats are rushing to stop this from happening. Basically, you have a split. You have Chicago aldermen who are completely against this happening. You have Springfield politicians on both sides of the aisle who want to see this stopped. Some want to see it stopped entirely. Some just want to say, hey, wait until the elected Chicago school board is in place. But either way, it's, to me, just deliciously ironic to lean back and watch how Springfield is desperately trying to stop Chicago public schools from basically disinvesting in their highest performing schools, which it's just the whole thing is asinine. Chris, I know you follow Chicago stuff really closely. Why don't you kick us off here?
So the interesting thing about all of this is that it shows that there's some pessimism on the part of the Chicago Teachers Union, the current board of CPS, that once they move to an elected Chicago school board, they're not sure how successful they're going to be. And that's why we originally saw a few months ago how they were kind of in favor of the hybrid system they were trying to put forward after being 100% in favor of a fully elected Chicago school board. I think that after the Mayor Johnson's Bring Chicago Home initiative failed, they're kind of waking up a little bit to how toxic perhaps they are at the ballot box. So they're trying to push through these initiatives now. Let's cut funding for magnet schools now while we can. Let's cut funding for charter schools now while we can, because if they get through the elected Chicago school board and CTU has a bad election and you start having more moderate candidates get elected to Chicago school board, they're never going to be able to get this done. So that's why the legislature is trying to move so quickly on this, because they know, they have to stop this while the Chicago Teachers Union still has some authority.
Interesting. Who else has got thoughts on this? I know we kind of hit it hard last week, so there may not be a lot, but open it up.
At this point, I think the CPS and CTU should just merge, just one organization.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember when those two organizations actually were mostly at odds at most of the time, but that certainly hasn't been the case for a while at this point. All right, let's keep moving. So one more topic on sort of policy, but this has been sitting on the bottom of our agendas for like 2 months, and it's finally sort of bubbled up enough that it's a worthwhile topic to spend some time on, which is so California has sort of been the leader on banning specific ingredients because that seems to be the topic right now. Let's just ban everything we don't like. So we're banning TikTok, we're banning non-compete agreements. Let's also ban a number of ingredients in most of the foods that people eat, even though the FDA says that they're fine. And so California went pretty far on this, and now Illinois, in a bill that Willie Preston put in, that Alexi Giannoulias is pushing really hard, will now ban a handful of ingredients. So I don't want to read the ingredients here, but they're in a bunch of things that people eat and drink regularly, like Mountain Dew, which is going to be a killer for me personally, though probably great for my health. But these are starting to really bubble up and move down in Springfield with a month left. This is a bill people are looking at. I know the Illinois Manufacturing Association is adamantly against this bill, basically because the point is, let's leave this to the FDA. This is the job of the FDA, not a bunch of unelected bureaucrats and politicians down in Springfield. Let's let the experts do what they do. But of course, that's just not what Springfield is known for. So open it up if anybody has thoughts on us going even further than California, far left progressive California, when it comes to banning ingredients in the state.
I just think there's a lot more important issues and things that they could be dealing with, and being worried about whether or not people are eating like red Skittles, I think is just absurd. Let the FDA do its job. That's the point.
And the red Skittles are the best Skittles too. So like, if you're going to outlaw something, outlaw the yellow ones. Nobody eats the damn yellow ones.
Amen.
I'll tell you that after about 2 months of MREs in Iraq, it's the Skittles that were all over the place because everyone got sick of them. So you cannot survive on those Skittles long term.
So they're not like the Ho-Hos, or what's the one that could survive a nuclear holocaust? The
Twinkies.
The Twinkies. Yeah. So not like Twinkies.
I think you might. I don't know how many of y'all have talked to people in their 20s and early 30s. I think there's actually a little bit of a libertarian bent, or a little bit of there might be more Republican leaning people that would support this than you think. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't want to be bothered, but they don't like the fact that when you look at a can of Quaker Oats in Europe, it has like 6 ingredients, and the one in the United States has like 400 ingredients, right? Like there's a lot of people kind of onto that stuff. I know I buy farm fresh eggs. I have somebody in a shop near where mine is, and she's
you seem like the kind of guy who actually has chickens in the backyard. I'm surprised you buy your eggs.
No chickens in my backyard, but I do have a shop next to my shop that basically sells those. And but I think about her family. She homeschooled kids. She's hardcore Republican. but she sells raw, like fresh, raw pet food. And then she eats very healthy, you know, kind of clean stuff. So I think it actually is. I don't think this is as much of the RD thing that you might think. I think there's actually, especially some younger conservative leaning people that don't trust big corporations and kind of all that other stuff. So there might be a little bit more support for it than I know. There's some candidates I've spoken with that actually are okay with these kinds of bills. I understand what Michael's saying about, you know, it should be at the federal government instead of the state government. I certainly agree with that, but I think you'd be surprised that there'd be a lot of people on that would be voting Republican that wouldn't have a problem with the candidate who supports these sorts of bans.
Well, imagine if you're like a man. Go ahead, Chris.
I'll actually. Okay, Michael, go.
I was just gonna say, you know, with this not, if this gets to the point where it's like state by state and different states are banning, you know, certain chemicals and things like that, then you're gonna have these companies that are, you know, mass producing food that are like, oh, okay, well, I can't sell it here, or if I sell it there, I can't include this. Like, are we gonna have like 50 different versions of like Skittles for every state? Like, it's just silly, and that's why it needs to be at the federal level. Like, I'm all for, like, we have 9 ducks and we exclusively eat duck eggs, no chickens. We have them, they're at my parents' house. So I'm all for that kind of stuff. If people can make those decisions for themselves, and if they don't want to eat red Skittles, and, you know, that's their decision to make.
I mean, I think that's the point, right? I mean, Mark, you mentioned libertarian. Isn't it libertarian to say government's just not going to outlaw it, and if you don't want to eat it, don't eat it? Like, there's this idea that you have to do things unless it's banned by government. If you don't like red Skittles, then don't eat red Skittles. You don't want Mountain Dew, don't drink Mountain Dew. But I don't want to pass over the hilarious image of Michael sitting there cracking these tiny little duck eggs.
No, they're 2 to 3
yeah,
times,
they're bigger.
times the size of chicken eggs.
Are they really?
Yeah, I can buy the same things, and I hear they're good for baking instead of for like scrambled eggs or whatever. But I mean, I'm with you, Collin, and I'm not saying I would support the legislation, but at the same time, when you look at things and you're forced where everything at the store has that stuff in it, right? When you go to the store, every single thing, it's when you make it so hard for the public to get things that are a little bit more nutritious. I'm just telling you, this isn't going to cut along party lines like you might think. That's all I'm saying.
Fair.
Well, and Mark, to your point, there were a number of Senate Republicans that voted for the small banning bill that had red dye number 3 and a few others because there were already existing alternatives to it, and many companies had already made that change. I was one that supported that bill on the floor. Now, to Michael's point, right? When does state by state banning actually interfere with interstate commerce and the Fed has to kind of come in? It's interesting. We are significantly seeing a states' rights push, whether it's sanctuary cities to avoid federal immigration discussions. I don't think any state is actively saying they're going to do everything that the Fed can do, but they definitely, in some cases, act up and jump when they don't like where the federal structure is for all 50.
Yeah, fair. I mean, listen, my thing is, if it's unsafe, then the FDA should just ban it. Like, I don't have a problem with banning the ingredients. I have a problem with bureaucrats and politicians deciding which ingredients are okay and which ones are not. Because like you guys, I know how that process works. It's not being run by scientists. It's being run by whoever cuts the biggest check or doesn't cut the biggest check. So if the FDA says these things are unsafe, let's ban the damn things and move on. But individual states making these decisions when it's not scientists doing that, it doesn't make any sense. Especially in a state like Illinois. People don't realize when we talk manufacturing, food is considered manufacturing. The largest segment of our manufacturing industry in the state is food manufacturing. It's a $135 billion a year industry in this state. And so when politicians want to go and start screwing around with that, that's a massive sector of this economy of jobs and economic impact that will have in the state. So this is not a minor thing.
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna offer something here that would be a more unique. A unique approach might be to create some sort of interstate compact with an idea like, let's say there's the dye, where you say, hey, we're not going to ban it on our own, but if we can get 10 other states to ban it, we produce this compact that has enough leverage then to push it at the FDA, which, by the way, the FDA is just a bunch of bureaucrats, so I don't trust them either. I mean, we could talk about what was going on over there as well. So you're just talking about which group of bureaucrats you're going to have basically making the decision. So there's something to it.
Yeah, fair. Well, here we go. Look at, there's a reason why we miss Mark down in Springfield. He's coming up with solutions instead of just complaining about the problem. So there you go. All right, let's look. I wanted to go to you, Craig, because you brought this up as we were talking about, what to discuss on this week's episode. You're sort of in the throes of the budget process down in Springfield right now. I would say you, but I don't actually mean you because you're a Republican, so you're not allowed to have an opinion on the budget, even though the governor will blame you when the budget doesn't look exactly how he'd like. But it's happening now, and one thing we're seeing is that even though economic indicators are pulling back significantly, you basically have a bunch of Democrats down in Springfield in both the House and Senate who think it's Christmas morning and want to spend on every priority and every idea they may have. What are you seeing that's going to happen over the next 30 days? And is there going to be any sort of a budget that might actually be balanced?
Well, you have to presume that Illinois has ever had a balanced budget, right? Remember, we sold the Thompson Center, 3 or 4 years at $300 million apiece. So
Right.
the challenge with the state budgeting process, it's projected revenues have to match projected expenditures. There's no 98% confident rate in the revenue projections kind of structure. So, we're there, we're involved. We get to sit in the appropriations committees while the agencies present their budget requests, and we get to ask difficult questions about where they've screwed up in the past. But you're right, we're not on equal footing when it comes to the development of that budget. And sure enough, we'll get it, hundreds or thousands of pages with a few hours on a Friday late night or Saturday late night, and then be blamed for having voted against it. And oh, by the way, when the pork is handed out, it'll be like last year, which was pretty absurd. How they said, I mean, it almost gets us back to the spoils arguments of the federal government in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that we finally agreed we had to do away with because it was not good for the citizens of the country.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. And we've talked about it on previous SFRs that Springfield has become so partisan that there used to be a time where, listen, didn't matter if your district was represented by a Republican or a Democrat, it got investments of state dollars. But as Springfield gets way more hyper partisan under this governor, you're seeing that, now they're not even giving those investments into Republican districts and basically saying, hey, you want state money, you got to elect a Democrat. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, as you said, and I'm sure it will continue. But what's frustrating is you've got your Senate Republican caucus that actually wants to participate. I don't know that the same could be said about the House right now. There's not a lot of Batiniks in the House, but there's, the Senate caucus has been very much, hey, we want to be part of the solution. We'd like to help with these negotiations and figure out a consensus plan that makes sense for the people of Illinois. And even that last year was rebuffed. Harman pretended like, oh yeah, we're going to talk to him, and then completely ignored the Senate caucus. And it looks like it's happening again on the Republican side. So, I mean, that's the frustration, is you guys want to be bipartisan. You're not allowed to be. And then Pritzker and the Democrats blame you for not being bipartisan when they wouldn't even let you in the damn room.
Yeah, let me jump in here if I might. Here's what I would be advocating for if I was still down there. They're not letting you in the room, so I would focus on one or two things that are core issues that are across the state and say, we think this should be in the budget, and just pound it in the media. One of the things that I learned being trying to get things done from the minority and super minority side is that a lot of people make the mistake thinking that they're going to go to these committee meetings, we're going to have hearings, and we're going to talk to them, and then we're going to convince them. And I had good bills and good ideas that I couldn't get any traction on at all. And the way I got traction was I embarrassed them by writing up ads, going on radio across the state, by just pushing it. One of them was, we used to have the soybean-based ink mandate, which didn't affect the price of soy, but it cost universities hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, because they don't make soybean-based ink for modern digital printing equipment. So I had this bill, I passed, I say, hey, this doesn't work anymore, and it failed. So then I just went everywhere making fun of them. Like, here's an example of waste in spring. I would talk to anybody that would listen about soybean-based ink. And sure enough, in the next BEMP, they got rid of the soybean-based ink mandate. What I'd be talking about if I were in the Republican caucus right now is I'd be talking about property tax. Now, I had the bill that I filed right before I left, and then it was Giannoulias picked up, that took the pension ramp doing this and took that savings and slowly added on a per pupil basis to property tax relief. There's a potential for billions of dollars of property tax relief in this budget right now. And they should be talking about property tax relief because it polls really well in the suburbs. It polls really well in the city. It polls really well in the near south suburbs, where they literally pay 4 times the property tax rate. Harvey pays 4 times the property tax rate that they pay in Winnetka, by the way. These are the sort of things that we should be pounding. We should be pounding. This should be in the budget. This should be in the budget. This should be do all kinds of memes of them locking us out. And they're going to be forced to make a decision of either owning the fact that they didn't put it in the budget or putting it in the budget. The way you're going to get something done in the budget is actually going to be easier by embarrassing them on the outside versus trying to do it on the inside. That would be my approach.
The only caveat I'd add to that, Mark, is if you're going to focus on property taxes, you have to use the overall message of cost of living, because every poll I'm seeing has property taxes way down. So don't couch it as taxes. Couch it as this is gonna help working families who are struggling to afford paying their bills by helping with the property taxes. I like the issue. It's just this is where Republicans struggle. We get so focused on the issue and we don't message it at a higher level. And so yeah, I think you could focus on property taxes and do it very well as long as you present it as this is going to help struggling working families who can't afford to pay their bills.
So, Craig, you want to run that for me? You want to push that? Can you talk to Kern about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the challenge, right? You think the cost of living can be easily addressed at the Illinois level, only if Illinois is willing to make some significant changes. Reduction of the gas tax, right? I had a bill that capped it at a certain percent so that when you had rising gas prices, it didn't have an increase in the taxes on it. The governor found a great win-win for him, which was eliminating the grocery tax, which had been a Republican idea pre-COVID, during COVID, and even post-COVID. The problem, he understood, it didn't cost the state anything. So there was no reason for him to include what we did, which was a GRF backfill for the municipalities. So when you get to that level, there's going to be no appetite, right? There was a recent graph, 7 years ago, the state budget was in the 41, 42 billion. Now we're going to be pushing 54, 57. When you're dealing with that type of escalation and growth in permanent expenses, that property tax relief is not viable when you look at the current year, the next year, or the out years, the way the Democrats have run this state for the last decade.
Well, Craig, you guys, the Senate Republican caucus has done an awesome job bringing to light just healthcare, talking about spending so much money on healthcare for non-citizens. Tell my wife, we just had to take Tiny Teddy to the hospital to run an ultrasound for basically doctors covering their rear ends. I mean, what they were trying to check was fine, but they had to check the box. But we're paying $1,000 out of pocket. And I'm sitting there seething, paying my $1,000, knowing that if I was here, if I was not an Illinois citizen, American citizen, that would have been free. If I was, in a specific lower income bracket, that would have been free. But I'm paying $1,000 out of pocket, and it's frustrating. And that's cost of living right there. That's $1,000 that I could use towards diapers for my 1-month-old child.
And
go ahead, Greg.
Simple, because you could put that in a graph, and we did. We sent mailers and had stuff. It was compare your health care to what the governor's doing.
It's an awesome graph. We loved it. We showed it in one of our episodes. It was awesome.
Yeah. So, and that's the type of messaging, right? We definitely have the ability or the curse of putting facts prior to emotion and trying to explain what goes on in Springfield. And the other side is all about emotion, damn the facts. And we've got to get better there.
Yeah. Well, look. You just talked about the fact of the non-citizen. We're spending $1 to $2 billion on non-citizens at healthcare. Had this been a couple of years ago, we wouldn't have had that money. The reason we have the money, Senator, is pensions are decreasing. The state pension costs are decreasing in terms of a percent of the budget. So the rest of the budget can grow with inflation. You still have something opening, and they're just spending that on new stuff. And this year, it was $2 billion for all this illegal citizen, immigrant, all this stuff that we did for them. There is room in the budget for property tax relief, and it's a little bit of a drip program. We have a video on it. I'll send it to you guys. But the point is, you have to push something. They're wasting the money on it right now. They're just taking the savings that we're seeing. When I first got there, we had stickers because we had the budget impasse, and we had stickers that made 32 in, 32 out. It meant 32 billion in, 32 billion out. So that was 2019 or 2015. And we're at, would you say 54 is what we're looking at this time? You're right. The growth has been off the charts. There is plenty of room in the budget to slowly and gradually increase property tax relief. And it's a winning issue. I mean, the polls that I've seen, actually, even property, like we even do an open answer, like what's your biggest issue? I see property taxes that people type into their poll. You can couple it with cost of living, but it does well everywhere in the state. Whether it's that issue or a different issue, they need to push a very big specific issue and say this needs to be part of it and box the Democrats in to either doing it or not doing it. And either way, it's a win. It's either a win politically or it's a win from a policy standpoint.
Well, Mark, you're not wrong, because I mean, even Rich Miller keeps banging that drum that, look, we're not spending as much money on pensions. Like, even he's admitting there's money to spend. So I mean, if the Democrats spokesperson, Capital Facts, admits it, you know it's true, and you know they know it if they're talking about it. So you're not wrong on that. Let's shift to some political topics. We've done a lot of policy here, so I want to talk about politics. And Robert, we're going to start with you. Our mutual friend Patrick Kenneally, the McHenry County State's Attorney. I know, Craig, you represent a good portion of McHenry County, so I'm sure you'll have thoughts as well. But McHenry County State's Attorney has announced abruptly that he will not be running for re-election. He had been on the ballot. Pat's a good friend of my wife and I. We're very close with him, and I can tell you, Cat Facts, as mentioned, has been skewering him mostly just because he's an opponent to marijuana, and if you oppose marijuana, you are automatically in the outs with Cat Facts. But I'll tell you just flat out, Kenneally is one of the good people who was in office for the right reason, and that's why he's getting out. Is that he's been agonizing over this for probably 3 or 4 years now, that he knows he likes serving the people and wants to do the job, but he wants to be there with his family. He just wants to be there to see his kids grow up. He's got young kids, a lot of them, like 36 different kids, just a joke for a friend. But he's just a good guy, and he has been struggling with this for a while, and he didn't have a replacement in mind, couldn't find somebody who would take over. So he said, fine, I'll do it for 4 more years. Well, now it looks like he's got a replacement. So Robert, what are you hearing about this? And obviously any thoughts on Pat and his 8 years in office?
Yeah, so if I could say, I was not surprised at all and absolutely dumbfounded all at the same time. That's how this week went for me. Pat was one of my original courtroom partners. I like to brag that I was actually first trained him, in the courtroom, and then I went off into other things, and he rose to the top of the office. He's a great guy, and I agree. He's doing this for all the right reasons, even when he and I would, and still do, butt heads on what he's doing, positions he takes, how the office is run. He's doing what he thinks is good and what he thinks is just, and that's why we want people in office. That said, since the day he ran, Pat said, this is a 2-term thing. I'm doing this twice. I'm doing this for 8 years, and I'm getting out. And yeah, it didn't seem like he had somebody, that he was ready to hand the office over to. Randy Freese's first assistant has the word on the street is they have formally nominated her last night, or formally slated her last night, to run. She's fantastic, but she has fought the idea of politics for a long time. She does not want to be in politics. She's wanted to be a public servant. And obviously, it comes with the job. So we're going to see. Democrats have a handful more days if they're going to try to slate somebody and at least make this, a race. There's arguments that, Pat running or Randy running, whatever makes it more likely or less likely that they will do so. But we'll see.
I mean, the timing certainly doesn't seem unintentional, that making this announcement and making the flip. And I'm saying this, I got to talk to Pat for 60 seconds, and we mostly talked about our little ones and life outside of politics. So I don't know, but certainly seems like that timing was intentional, and it's not a bad thing to put Democrats in the trick bag and say, fine, go find a candidate in 5 seconds. If that's the case, then kudos to the Republicans for a smart play, but I don't know that it's the case.
Yeah, that's the rumors, floating around the county is was this intentional or was this not? I don't know if you remember 8 years ago, but his predecessor, Lou Bianchi, was out passing petitions, and Pat did the same. Lou did not file his, and Pat filed his. Again, I don't know what was intentional, what was not. Pat doesn't tell me what's going on. his decision-making process, and Lou clearly did not. But, you couple those together, and I'm sure the rumors are going to be going. And if the Democrats do slate somebody, I'm sure that is going to be a message that they're going to run with, is that, we didn't even get to have an open primary of, deciding who should be the next candidate. Just Pat chose who his successor should be. Would that get enough traction? I don't know. You're the expert there.
Good news is we haven't seen that message work very well, so it's not. I don't think that would be a concern for Republicans in McHenry County. But I mean, Pritzker, the Democrats have lots of money and they're ready and willing to spend it anywhere they want to or anywhere they can, as evidenced by dumping millions of dollars into primaries on their side just a couple of weeks ago. So if they can find a candidate, I'm sure they'll try.
Well, and there's a competitive race. Well, not a competitive. There is a race for county board chairman. So there is already a countywide race that is going to be going on. And so if they can find a candidate, they're already planning the mailers, they're already planning the door knocking and all the things, that I assume they can jump on board. But, it is still McHenry County. I don't see a Democrat winning that race. But, it isn't the McHenry County of 12 years ago. So it's not as much of a guarantee as it would have been 12 years ago.
Yeah, and arguably for those that had, if they were paying attention, this is not as big a surprise as it appears. If you look at what he wasn't fundraising for compared to when he was fundraising a number of years ago, that could have been an indicator. There were rumors probably as long ago as a year that maybe he wasn't thinking about it. And then sure enough, you go and get petitions. So people forget about that. So will we get beat up, or will he get beat up on the named successor? Possibly a little bit. But when you look at Randy, originally an intern in the office, and if those that watch the news, has been the lead prosecutor on some of the highest profile cases. So there is no doubt that she knows the business of the state's attorney's office. The only thing I'd heard was that she, again, like what you mentioned, wasn't looking for the political side of things. And maybe that was the discussion 8-10 months ago. And it's been, a continuing discussion that maybe she finally came around, and so it made the timing right.
I mean, listen, go down the list of the best politicians, the best elected leaders. They're the ones who don't want to do the politics. I mean, so honestly, that's what our founding fathers built a structure around, which is people who, have real lives and real skills, and they leave that to go serve the public good for a short period of time. So, that description of the Randy Freeze, who I don't know if I've met her, to be honest. If I have, it's just been in passing, but I've heard nothing but good things about her. And if that is who she is, that's what made Pat great. I mean, it drove people crazy that he wasn't political, but that's what made him good at the job. And sometimes you liked what he did and sometimes you don't, like Robert said, but he was always doing what he believed in, and it was politics never came in the equation, which we worked with him on his campaigns. We helped get him elected. We worked very closely with him. He's been a client for years. My wife is his fundraiser. And so, we would have loved him to be more political. We begged him to be more political probably once a month, but that just wasn't who Pat is or what Pat was. So if Randy's going to carry on that tradition, then McHenry County is probably going to be really happy with their state's attorney's office.
Yeah. Well, and I can back that up for what Craig said. I mean, worked with Randy as well, still work, more with Randy than with Pat when I have things going on in the office that I need to discuss, just obviously because, of where their positions are in the office. And she is, there will be, again, same thing. People will like some things she does, and some things people will like things that don't like things that she does. But if you got frustrated that Pat wasn't political enough, Randy will be even less. But I agree, and we can get into the argument someday or the discussion someday that state's attorney and sheriff should not be elected positions for the state, and that's a whole nother discussion. The one that I don't ever see changing, but it doesn't make sense because of this reason. You shouldn't have to choose a party or whatever else to be elected. A Republican's not going to get elected in Cook County, even if they're the best person for the job, because they're not a Democrat in Cook County.
So Robert, when I first moved to Illinois, it was a sheriff's race that caught my attention, and I was like, ooh, is McHenry County? Where's Boss Hogg? Is this Hazard County? State's attorney, sheriff elected. So if there's two positions that party affiliation really shouldn't matter. It is the rule of law, the Constitution, and the equal enforcement. Those are the two positions. So absolutely agree with your thoughts.
And if any races have been overly politicized in McHenry County, it's been the state's attorney's races over the years and the sheriff's races over the years. And I could probably tell, just like you, Craig, I could tell 6 or 7 stories of different state's attorney races or sheriff's races in McHenry County over the last 15 years. I mean, that's usually the hot race.
Well, I gotta contest something here. A few topics ago, Collin, you were talking about how much you don't want to listen to unelected bureaucrats. But if you take away the ability for the people to choose their state's attorney, the people to choose their sheriff, the people to choose their judges, all you're doing is creating a new culture of unelected bureaucrats. So while I understand the point that, like, the rule of law shouldn't be partisan, the rule of law shouldn't be, divisive. Fact of the matter is, I mean, if you want to we don't have a functional bureaucracy in this country that would be able to choose, like, the best candidate for state's attorney, the best candidate for sheriff, the best candidate for judge. If we lived in that society and we didn't need a democracy, sure, that would be fantastic. Unfortunately, we don't live in that society. Bureaucracies are oftentimes corrupt and don't do the people's bidding. So that's why it's a good thing that you have a elected, state's attorney. You have an elected sheriff, because sometimes you have wins in those departments.
So elect, but don't make them partisan, maybe, is sort of the middle ground there. But I guess at this point, when one party is interested in the rule of law and the other party is not, it's pretty clear which party to elect in those two positions, which many counties do tend to lean more conservatively when it comes to their choices for sheriff and state's attorney than they do for all the other positions for that reason. Let me move us along just because we are running out of time here. So we're in political topics, and Michael has not been able to talk a lot. So let's let Michael talk for a minute here. And let's get into House District 114. Something that stood out to me this week is a press release from Schmidt and the House Republicans. It just caught my eye because they were highlighting the bills that State Representative Kevin Schmidt has co-sponsored. And they're focused on, let me read this here, supporting the well-being of women and families across Illinois. Great messaging. I love it. And it's pretty clear they're preparing him for a general election in which he's going to face a female and a minority female at that in House District 114. So we don't need to go through the bill specifically unless, Michael, you want to, but it's pretty clear that House Republicans are preparing Kevin Schmidt for what will likely be the hottest, the top tier 1 race, at least legislatively in the state. And frankly, this is a pretty good start talking about expanding healthcare provisions for pregnant women, caregiver support, healthcare access. These are the kind of things that play well in a general election. So I give kudos all around. Go ahead, Michael.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're definitely ramping up and getting things moving in the right direction. I talked to Tony McCombie earlier in the week, and she said that the House Republican organization was going to be sitting down with a lot of the members in these competitive districts and candidates and kind of formulating some of their game plan. They're going to be hiring people, in the coming days to staff some of these races throughout the state. So things are really starting to kick into gear. We talked last week that Kevin has kind of increased his fundraising and is kind of matching LaToya on what she's been able to raise, with her committee. So that's another good sign. And some of these bills that Kevin has co-sponsored that have, ultimately passed and been signed by the governor. I think there's a lot of positive things to highlight there. I just saw that he did an interview with one of the local stations about that health insurance bill and kind of banning junk insurance and some other things. So they're definitely highlighting a lot of the right things, and it's going to be rough and tumble, but I think that, Kevin has a strong chance here to come out on top once again.
Yeah, I mean, I like that how the Democrats like to talk about how they just weren't prepared for that district. But it goes so much deeper than that. I mean, we've highlighted on a handful of episodes here, and we've gotten a plan to maybe highlight it again in a future episode, just the changing politics of that region. And it goes so much more than Democrats not being prepared. Schmidt's going to come into this thing ready for this race, and he didn't win by a fluke 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but they're going to dump a ton. They, as in the Democrats, are going to dump a ton of resources behind Greenwood. If Republicans can hold the line on that race, I'd like to see us picking up seats, but certainly if we could hold that seat, that alone would be a pretty big win.
Well, he won by 2,500 votes last time, so it wasn't, like a insignificant margin. I mean, he put up a pretty strong showing. East St. Louis is just doesn't have as much power as they have in the past, and that's one of the things that kind of got the Democrats over the top in that district. I mean, Latoya just doesn't work it very hard, and I've heard from some other legislators that the Democrats are even kind of aggravated with Latoya now because they're like, hey, we're giving you a second chance, and like, what are you doing? Like, you don't see her out in the district. Like, she's just not a high quality candidate.
Yeah, a weak candidate in a region that has been trending away from Democrats. And I hope this is just their money pit. I mean, the truth is, I think we're in a really good position here, even if the Dems drop in several mil. And if they drop that money there, they're not dropping it up here in the suburbs. Now, I know they've got unlimited money, but at a certain point, you hope maybe they start to run low. So if they're going to dump it here and Schmidt and the local Republicans can hold the line, that'd be huge for our chances to hold on to seats up here and maybe even pick up a couple.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that's Schmidt. Let's also talk about House District 91. This is up here. This is another one of those topics that has been on the bottom of our agendas, this one for like 2 or 3 months, only because we've just noted a few small things. You know, I'm going to give a couple quick details here. So Democrats, when the Illinois death tax was a big topic and they put Democrats on some bills to try to address the death tax, you know they're going to put, the way Springfield works, they're going to put their vulnerable members on these bills so that they can use them on their mailers and their TV ads come the next election. And so when they put Democrats on these bills, and Sharon Chung was one of them, I just kind of scratched my head and made a note. And then Republicans a month or two ago went hard after Sharon Chung in House District 91, attacking her for her support for the graduated income tax, and a couple other things on tax issues. This was in a press release a few months ago. And then now I see Chung putting out press releases on some bills that she's sponsoring. There just seems to be a lot of efforts on both sides of the aisle in House District 91. And while it is on the target list, it's not one of the top 5-ish targets that people talk about. You know, we didn't cover this when we talked about the races to watch recently. You know, 91 is kind of right there on the fringe of possibly being in play. You know, I said when candidates all filed, we did a special live for the Lincoln Dext episode. And I said, you know, this is a district worth looking at, 91. It's not as Democrat as everyone seems to think. Trump only lost it by 8. Ronner only lost it by 6. I mean, Chung won by 4.5 points last time. This is not a runaway district for Democrats, and Republicans are really high on their nominee there, Desi Anderson. And so it's just, there's been those signs, and maybe I'm, you know, reading the tea leaves too much, but it just seems like there's a lot of people looking at 91, and it's not making the top of anybody's lists, but it's a race people should probably be paying attention to. So tell me if I'm crazy or if anybody agrees with my thoughts.
No, I totally agree. And I've seen Desi Anderson a couple of times this year at different events and things like that. She was at the Republican Women Conference at the beginning of the month. She's been working it pretty hard. And I think, you know, she's a strong candidate, young, married, got a good family, those kind of things. And also she has some ties to that kind of LaHood world. So I think that'll be helpful as well if she's got some of those LaHood folks kind of backing her and batting for her.
Yeah, I mean, Chung's done decent on fundraising, but she doesn't have the massive war chest that a lot of these Democrats in Tier 1 races have. And locally, I mean, if you look at the local districts, my team, our data team is awesome at Core, and they did a deep dive in, take away the federal races and the state races and just look at the local county races, local races, and see how partisan these districts are. And 91, actually, in many cases, if you take away the hyper-partisan races, is a break-even district. Now, I know on the partisan races, it's more like D+4, D+6. I get that. But there are underpinnings here of a possible opening for Republicans, and it's interesting to look at.
This is something that I would like to add about a race like this. We're still stuck in the mindset that, boy, we couldn't win in an off year. How are we going to win in a presidential year? But our voters have switched. So I did a lot better in 2020 than I did in 2018. In 2018, I had to take the arrows for Trump, but then the Trump people weren't coming out to vote, right? So then in 2020, at least those people came out to vote for Trump and then went down ballot and voted for me, and I won by 4 or 5 points in 2020 versus, I don't know, a half a point at 500 and some votes in 2018. So this might be one of those districts that purely gets into play because we've seen an inversion of who the supporters are, where maybe a lot of our supporters, at least the last three cycles, including this one, are presidential voters, and the midterm voters are actually more likely to be, you had a big imbalance of women that came out last election, right? Which certainly didn't help us. Just generically, we do much better with men than we do with women. So these races where we lost by 4 points, if the money were equal, I would actually have called them a coin flip. I think we're still an underdog in a race like this, simply because of the money factor. But if the money was even, I would actually make this a coin flip race.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's your caveat, right? We're not going to have the money to make any of these races even, but you're certainly, there's signs. And you run a good candidate, run a good race. Our data showed from the last election, a good candidate can change 3 points in a race. A good campaign can change 5 points in a race. Even if you lose the money battle, there's 8 points right there, and you flip the seat. So there's definitely an opportunity here, and it seems like people are looking at it. The House Republicans wouldn't put out a press release against Chung. The House Democrats wouldn't be putting out press releases on her bills if she wasn't at least on a list somewhere of potentially being vulnerable. All right, Michael, we're on you, and I want to go back to you because I'm honestly sick of talking about Darren Bailey, and yet here we are again. But we got to do it because apparently him and Tom Devore are levying accusations that Democrats are paying off Republican elected officials, and that's why we don't fight harder against some of these bills. What the hell's going on here?
Yeah, they basically have like a conspiracy theory that they've kind of been perpetuating over the course of probably the past 2 weeks or so, that like Democrat interest groups like the IEA are contributing to Republican candidates, whether they're incumbents or, candidates that are running for the first time for elected office, with the intent of basically like buying them off. Like, okay, this person will be less assertive against the bills that we're promoting if we do that. So it's just kind of like a half-baked thing. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but they've been beating that drum pretty steadily, and targeting specific members too, which is kind of silly.
Seems like Charlie Myers most in their crosshairs, or at least Tom Devore's crosshairs.
Yeah, Tom lives in Charlie Myers' district, so there's kind of some speculation that maybe he's interested in running for that seat next go around, or there's somebody else that he's kind of laying the groundwork for. But Charlie's a hardworking and very popular incumbent state rep, and really works his district harder than just about anybody. So I think that's a tough road to hoe.
So Michael, hold on, just clarifying questions here. So what they're saying is that if you take Democratic money, or if left of center money benefits you, then you're bought and paid for by the left. Is that the concept here?
Yeah, basically like controlled opposition. Like I wrote you a check.
All right. So no, just was looking for yes, no on that. So sure. if Pritzker were to spend millions of dollars to help nominate you for governor, then that means you're controlled by the left, correct?
Sure. I mean, based on that logic, JB Pritzker put $33 million like promoting Darren and making sure that he was his opponent, and then beat him by 12 points. So, I think that they've got this backwards. I think if you're like a Democrat, like JB Pritzker or one of these interest groups that have more money than you know what to do with, there's plenty of material that you could use to attack Darren and Tom Devore, and you could put them 6 feet under and end their political careers if they wanted to. But I think a lot of these actors on the Democrat side have an understanding that people like Darren Bailey and Tom Devore cause more problems for Republicans than they do for Democrats. So just let them keep doing their thing and let the chips fall where they may. But I think that they've got Darren and Tom have this inverted.
Yeah. Well, listen, there's also this lack of understanding that the IEA or these like Local 150 are not the CTU or SEIU. There's a significant difference between the far left progressive Chicago unions and trade unions, or the statewide teacher unions. Even IEA isn't IFT. IFT is even more progressive than IEA is. If you've got groups that are willing to work with you to enact good policy in the state, that's called governing. That was kind of the whole point of that primary election is, we need governing leaders, people who want to get things done, like, what Mark said before about finding solutions, like how Craig is a leader down in Springfield. If he's got a good bill, I don't think Craig cares where his votes come from. As long as people want to align with him on good public policy, then let's work together. Let's rock and roll.
Yeah.
Well, and this most recent primary, like if you compare the 2020 primary to the 2022 primary to the 2024 primary, like the candidates and the elected officials that get in there and get things done, like Mike Boss, Terry Bryant, Dave Severin, I mean, they had much better nights than these people that are more about the antics and things, which was a contrast to 2020 where the antics kind of won the day.
So governing leaders versus TikTok leaders?
Yeah.
Basically. All right. So I've never done this before, but we're basically closing down, but we do have a couple minutes. So for the first time ever, I'm actually going to let you guys pick. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 topics left on the agenda. I'm going to list them briefly and let you guys pick the one we close on. So we've got Palestinian protesters causing headaches for Democrats. We've got Biden pushing carbon capture while Illinois Democrats keep fighting him and rebuffing him. We've got Republicans who are struggling with the narrative on crime and keep falling backwards on that issue. And we've got yet even more Pritzker employees being caught ripping off government programs, with now over 250 of them having been caught ripping off the PPP program. So 4 topics. What do you guys want? Which one you guys want to end on? Let's let our guests choose. So Mark, Craig, Robert, what do you want?
Well, I want to extend for another hour because I think your clients want to hear all 4. But I'm actually curious where you're going with the Republicans losing the narrative on crime, because I was actually on X Spaces last night talking crime with the carjacking task force out in full. So that would be my vote.
Okay.
I'm with Craig. I was curious that your position is the Republicans are blowing this narrative. So I would love to hear the analysis as to how Republicans are getting that wrong.
Let's do it. Or maybe you guys will tell me I'm wrong. So let's talk about that. It'll be our final topic today. So this is my headline here. Not everyone on this podcast. I chose this headline of Republicans are losing this narrative. I'm watching, as I'm looking at the polls over the last 18 months, I have seen how crime has been slowly dropping in the polls in terms of most important issues for Republicans, or for voters, I mean. And just to illustrate this, we have some private polling that we do for subscribers to our Empower to Win platform, and our quarterly tracking in January that asked people, what's your number one issue? Crime was down to 8%. Of people who thought that was their top issue. And now we haven't even released it yet, but we're looking at the numbers for our April tracking poll, and it dropped down to 4%. So these are numbers that literally we haven't even released to the public yet. And even when we do release it, we only release it to our subscribers. So people who are watching this are getting hot off the presses insider info. And I believe there's a couple reasons for it, but I think the biggest is something that I read. Let me pull this up here. I wasn't ready to jump right to this topic. So I read this a couple weeks ago where the Illinois Sheriff's Association rolled out something about the death of a sheriff's officer deputy. I don't want to get into the weeds because we don't have time, but basically they went straight to the Safety Act. And we've been talking about for the last couple years now that where Republicans were going to fail on this narrative is if we did what you said, Craig, we're really good at, which is going straight to issues and the white, sort of those white paper policy solutions. And if we kept fighting on the Safety Act, the act itself, we were going to lose this narrative. And that's where we've been struggling, is it's always about the Safety Act, Safety Act, Safety Act, Safety Act, instead of being about crime and public safety. And so as a result, the more we hyper-focus on Safety Act, the more you give Rich Miller and Pritzker's Press Shop and the Democrats a chance to come back and say, well, guess what? Before the Safety Act, it would have looked like this. And it's really not a big difference under the Safety Act. We're getting lost in the minutia of a bill in Springfield. Instead of it being the headline, which is Illinois families are less safe because of these progressive policies from the Democrats. And I think personally, that's just my opinion, the reason why crime is dropping lower and lower in the priorities list of voters right now is because we've just let it get gummed up in the minutia. If you ask people, are you safe today, or are you safer today than you were yesterday? Their answer is no. So why in the hell are they then saying that safety is just not as important of an issue right now? And it's because of cost of living and other things. But I think we have messaged on this very badly, and it takes time. Bad messaging takes time, just like good messaging takes time to penetrate. And it's taken several years of bad messaging on crime to lead to this point where it's just not playing for Republicans as well as it could be. So that's my thoughts. That's my soapbox. I'll open it up for anybody to agree or disagree.
I'll jump in and I'll agree with you. And it's actually, I'll circle this back to our prior conversation because this is a place that Mr. Kenneally and I have disagreed. I have felt some of the messaging and some of his attitude on the Safety Act was basically taking the extremes, going too far, as opposed to finding the middle ground. Because there are countless things wrong with the Safety Act. It was, some of them were rolled back, some of the things were made a little better, but a lot of the things and a lot of the conversations I have with him, and a lot of the things that are being put out in general about how everything is the fault of the Safety Act, when that's not the case, or when look at this individual that was let out of custody because of the Safety Act, when, as you just said, the counter is, well, guess what? Before that, he would have been let out if he had happened to have $300 in his pocket. And so you're not protecting society from criminals, you are protecting society from poor criminals. And so if we overstep and make everything about one issue, then the rest of it gets lost in the weeds. And I can see that being the case.
Or just we're giving them an out. They have no out on crime. Their agenda on crime is awful. It's making people less safe. And if government has one job, it's to keep its citizens safe. So they have no ground to stand on unless you give them ground. If you say it's just about this one piece of legislation, they can now argue the minutia of that legislation until they've confused voters enough to the point where voters are like, I have no idea what's going on. But if you make it just about safety, the Prisoner Review Board is a great example of this. We're getting lost in the minutia of transparency and all these other issues when it's about safety. The Prisoner Review Board let people out who committed crimes and made people less safe, committed horrific crimes. It needs to always come back to a simple issue of safety, a simple feeling of safety, instead of letting it get lost in the minutia of its transparency. And is there an executive director or is there not an executive director? Or did they notify us or did they not notify us? Or did Pritzker follow the rules in making these appointments? Who gives a shit? What matters is, our voters, our families in this in this state safe, our kids safe, our seniors safe. That's what matters. And I think we just have let the Democrats sort of gum us up in a minutia, and we're losing the issue because of it.
So, Collin, this is mine, Butler. You got the last two. This one's mine. Collin, I'm going to agree with you, because I do think the Republicans have an issue with the crime messaging that allows Democrats to take advantage of. However, I'm going to present a simple solution. I'm not saying the polling's wrong. It's our polling. Of course, our polling's right. But I'm going to give a simple solution of why we might be seeing a drop in the importance of crime in polling. It's not summary. Right now, you always see a spike in crime, especially in the city of Chicago and the surrounding areas during the summer. And they talk about the long, hot summer. Everybody's afraid of it. Once you crime is about perception. That's all crime messaging is. It's perception. So once the long, hot summer starts and you start seeing, 5 dead at 63rd and Ashland every weekend, sad, but unfortunately very true in the city of Chicago, until you start seeing that on the news every night, the feeling of how safe one isn't going to go down. You're not going to see crime spike up. So I would anticipate, if I'm right, which I might be wrong on this one, but I would anticipate when we do our next quarter checking with the issues, you're going to see crime spike up a little bit. In the third quarter, you're going to see crime spike up a little bit. And Q4, you'll see it drop down again. Because crime, the fear of crime will correlate somewhat with the spike in crime over the summer.
I think it's a fair point. I always say crime is a feeling. A lot of these suburban communities where the stats actually show crime is down, and yet people feel it's up. Crime is always about a feeling more so than it is stats. And that's where, again, to your point, Craig, and I'll pass it to you, it's the Democrats are great about feelings, and we're always focused on facts. And this crime is a feelings issue. But go ahead. You were starting to jump in.
Now that I understand how you came up with that title, I get it, right? And we won't be lucky enough to hope for the right repeat offenders to happen once every couple of weeks, like we did with the PRB recently, where he killed the next day. And to Chris, and I'll do a shameless plug here, RW Graphics is the contract printer for Hey Jackass, your great crime stats tracker for Chicago. That first 80-degree day when shooting spiked, his new design was suns out, guns out. And so, yeah, it's going to come with the weather this summer. There's no doubt. But Collin, to your point, I think it's a matter of how do we message to ensure that if it's a feeling, that it doesn't seem to be going away and capitalize on that. So definitely.
Yeah, and this remains. I'm not, I don't know why I keep talking about Rich Miller this week, but I'm not Rich Miller who I'm saying, he's like, crime doesn't work. Stop talking about crime. Well, that makes me think crime is working, because if he's trying to tell us to stop talking about it, he's not doing that for our own good, but whatever. So I look at this poll and I think it does go up, and I'm not telling my clients to not talk about crime. When you look at the issues, crime is something that's emotional. It gets people to feel. So if you do crime right, if you message it correctly, it's a great way to contrast yourself with the left. But we have to understand whether it's taxes or crime or any of these issues, they all need to be something that proves the larger point. What is our larger narrative about Democrats? In this state, it has to be that Democrats are far left extremists who would rather help non-citizens than actually help you pay your bills and be safe in your own home. And we have to have a clear, consistent narrative. It doesn't have to be that, but somebody higher level needs to say, for Republicans in this state, this is our theme. This is our narrative. Everything fits into this one thing. And then we all got to go out and push that. And crime helps do that. Crime is one of the issues where the left is extremely extreme. The far left in this state on crime have owned the narrative. And so if you want to prove that Democrats are extreme, crime is a great issue to do that. So our clients are talking about crime. I'm not saying because it's dropping, stop talking about it. I'm simply saying let's stop getting stuck in the mud because it's about more than just the PRB, or it's about more than just one immigrant or one, migrant. It's about the larger issue about, do you care more about keeping our citizens safe? Do you want to keep grandma safe, or do you want to just let prisoners out in the street to commit more crimes? That's got to be the very simple narrative.
And so, Collin, I'm not going to let the smoke-filled room hear you say, if you do crime right. I think what you need to say is when you message on crime right. So we don't get the wrong view.
Fair. I appreciate it. I'm sure over 50 episodes, there's been plenty of times where if I ever am dumb enough to run for office, they can just clip it out and make me look like an idiot. All right, that's it for the time we have. Thank you so much to our guests for being on with us. As always, we've got closing thoughts. We'll let everybody give any final thoughts. So let's jump over to Mark. Any final thoughts as we close this down?
No, I wanted to talk about the pro-Palestinian protesters. I know Dan Ugasti filed a bill increasing penalties, so it's a bit of a crime issue, and he got all kinds of support at his office. And the thing that bothered me the most is that the counter argument from the people that were making the other argument said they needed to escalate this issue because the powers that be weren't doing what they wanted them to do. We should be jumping all over this even more than Dan did. We should be doing it at both caucuses because, okay, if they don't get their way again, how are they going to escalate it to the next level, right? What does it mean? Breaking windows, rioting, all that stuff. And it goes with the crime message. And I think that's kind of people see that stuff on TV and they get frustrated, or if they got caught in traffic. So he had an overwhelmingly positive response to that at his district office. So I think there's small opportunity for Republicans to draft on that a little bit.
Interesting. I like it. We'll keep an eye on it. Robert, what about you?
As long as we're there, I will join in that topic because I think it also dovetails. If there's a place that the Democrats are dropping the ball, whether it's messaging or just what they're pushing for, it is this issue, both the protests in general and then how people are reacting to it. There is a way to tell the far extreme side of your party that they are completely out of line with their actions and certain beliefs without necessarily giving up everything that you've ever thought. And I think the Democrats and these institutions need to figure out a way to say, you're entitled to your opinion. Free speech is free speech, but you can do it over here. You can do it safely, and you can do it quietly without harassing people. I just saw that USC has canceled their main commencement for this year because they don't think they can keep people safe. I mean, that is just unbelievable that we can't figure that out. And so, Republicans have our problems and how we message things and how we handle things. And this is one that they're botching horribly. And I agree. We need to jump all over it.
As we get closer and closer to the DNC in Chicago, this is going to be a hot topic. Mm-hmm. So, all right, Senator, if you want to cover that topic, feel free. Otherwise, your closing thoughts on whatever you'd like to talk about.
Oh, well, since we're touching on the unused topics, I'll go to the Pritzker employees ripping off the PPP program. I mean, I thought Madigan's indictment was the core of understanding that what we are fighting is a criminal enterprise called the DNC. But the fact that now your own government employees either just were smart enough to take advantage of the ability that they weren't going to get caught or prosecuted, or the worst case scenario, the system itself encouraged them to exert this fraud. And we just had the Attorney General in appropriations hearing yesterday would refuse to answer any questions on how prosecutions are going, how many are being prosecuted, talked about, oh, the statute of limitations is only 3 years. Apparently he didn't know the feds extended the statute of limitations on this fraud. So my gut, it's a criminal enterprise, and we see it every day if we listen hard enough to their message and their actions.
I mean, what, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20. Okay, maybe that's sort of, it happens and people do bad things, but you're talking about systemic within Pritzker's administration at every level in different departments. This level of fraud is unreal. And yeah, I've been not shocked because the media tends to be in Pritzker's pocket, but how this has not gotten more coverage. If this was 10 people and Rauner was governor, this would be an unending story at 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock every single night. We're talking about over 250, and they haven't finished the investigations. We've got over 250 people, and you have to dig deep to find any coverage of it at all. All right. I don't remember who went first or last time, so let's go to you, Chris. What are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are the NFL draft is tonight. The Bears will pick Caleb Williams. He will hilariously disappoint because any decision the Bears make will be the wrong one. NHL playoffs are on, which is more important than any draft or watching a White Sox lose. So tune into the NHL playoffs. One day the Blackhawks will be good again. And don't watch the NBA because the NBA is stupid and the same teams win every year. So you have a beautiful weekend. It's weather is warming up, and just stay safe out there.
Michael, finish this off, buddy.
Well, I just think we need to keep taking advantage of some of these topics that we touched on today, because there's a lot of opportunities there, especially, with the soft on crime stuff, and just keep pointing to specific examples, and let's embarrass the Democrats, like Mark said.
Well, listen, that's part of the reason. We've got a number of reasons why SFR exists. One of them is that we don't do this just to talk about it. And we've got story after story of Republican leaders, conservative organizations who will take what they gather from these episodes and put them in a press release or put it in a fundraising appeal. I mean, we're trying to equip our audience. So take the information from here. You've learned a lot, especially from Craig and Mark on this episode. Not so much from Robert, but we're happy to have them anyways. But you've learned a lot. That's the point of these episodes. So take it, use it, run with it. That's why we're here. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to Lane Davis, our producer, for putting in the work. I'm Collin Corbett. We will catch you next week on the Smoke-Filled Room.